with all due respect, there is control. There's an Ethics and Privileges Committee. There is control. The President of the Senate, the leadership of the Senate, does not just exercise the power. It doesn't just make a pronouncement. It sends you to a body of your peers and says, appear before us, tell us the circumstances of this case, right?
How much of control is an ethics and privileges
committee? Which is appointed by the
leadership of the National Assembly.
I'm going to do two things. One, it exists. That it is implemented in the way and manner it should is a political conversation I'm not going to go into.
But it's important because the matters we're discussing right now are political.
Can I? There is an Ethics and Privileges Committee peopled by your peers, including Senator Omo-Agege himself, right? Of course, he couldn't sit on the committee because he was the one being brought to the committee. But the practice and procedure instituted and implemented in this Senate, right, have all been, Omo-Agege has been a part of the shaping of that practice and procedure. One. Two, the rules that have been applied to Omo-Agege now, Omo-Agege was part of the people who applied it to someone else. At some point, we're going to have to be able to question the approbation and reprobation of, the arguments in favor of. At some point, we're going to have to be able to question it. Now, I'll say this, right? The exact, like I said before, same punishment, 181 legislative days reduced to 90 legislative days. So, same punishment. Same thing with the Ali Ndume case, in which he was a principal member of the committee that determined that. My question is this: and you see, I believe that equity and fairness and justice is as important a principle as anything else. If he was able to determine that another senatorial district should not have representation in the Senate for such and such conduct for such and such a period, why not?
Mr. Onoja, are you not limiting the general discretion of an institution down to essentially the participation of one senator in a previous case?
No.
Does that now justify anything that's...
Exactly.
And then the question I have for you, I don't know, are you aware that the panel that gave this report to the Senate to essentially lead to his suspension, that only 6 out of 16 members approved that report, they signed that report?
The other issue, if I may just say something, let us again understand the basis of the reason for the suspension. You are suspended for exercising a fundamental right. Under the Constitution, everything is subject to respect for the fundamental rights of a citizen. The right of expression cannot in itself be a basis for suspension. So when you are talking about exercise of such powers, the point is you've got to be conscious that you are now exercising a power that basically can easily be abused, that has no limit. A man exercises a fundamental right to freedom of expression, and then you take a disciplinary action that has a pervasive effect to an organic right preserved by the Constitution. So there's a problem with that. That's why in order to exercise that, you must be sure it is guided by law. And I do not know any law in this country today that allows a legislative department to remove the people from their house.
One of the things that comes under contention here is the integrity.
Yes.
I mean, when you talk about freedom of speech,
yes.
This is a senator who expressed his opinion alongside many others whom we haven't heard of. We should also ask whether or not the Senate is being partial. Are they singling him out for punishment? But he led the group, and he apologized on the floor of the Senate. But we understand that later he took the Senate to court, or took the matter to court,
yes.
Over what he had done. Do you think that, even within expression of freedom of, freedom of speech,
yes.
Do you think that he himself, the senator in question, had expressed has shown integrity with how he had conducted himself?
Even if the Senate misbehaved, it has nothing to do with the principle of freedom of expression. Bad expression is protected by the Constitution, just as good expression. The problem is that if we begin to regulate bad expression, where is the limit? And how do you contain it? And how do you prevent abuse of power and authority? So the issue, that's why the government in a democracy is divided into two. There are two important pillars, and that is the legislative, the executive, and when there is a conflict of interest, then you go to the court to ask for resolution, and that resolution becomes binding. In the case of this suspension, it's been taken to court. A court of appeal has decided that no, you don't have that type of power. But the problem is that in our country, the rule of law remains in jeopardy, you know. So you cannot just say that, oh, because you talk anyhow. People are allowed to talk anyhow. Let us understand it. To the talker or to the speaker is not anyhow. Let us understand that.
Just wondering, do you share his views in that regard?
I have,
in terms of the reason why Senator Omo-Agege has been suspended, do you think it's grievous enough to warrant 90 days?
I have absolutely not much in terms of disagreement. I believe that the rights, fundamental rights of everybody in this country are sacred, and they are to be placed on a pedestal over and above, you know, the penchant for abuse. No, it's impossible for any lawyer in this country to disagree, and I don't. But freedom of expression, as lofty an ideal as it is also a right that has the potential for consequences. That's why we have a body of in the first place. That's why we have a body of defamation laws. Why they don't seek to restrict the right. They also ensure that, you know, people have some sort of responsibility for the things that they say. Some sort of responsibility. The underlying principle is that, you know, there should be the exercise of responsibility along with the exercise of the right.
Some people say
what the Senate has simply said, and we must remember that at the foundation of all this conversation is the ability of the Senate to make laws that order the conduct of elections. Is the Senate empowered to do what it is in effect doing, about which Senator Omo-Agege complaining? That's at the bottom of this. Now the Senate is saying, well, we're within our right to do our constitutional function. And because you have disparaged us, you have taken up a role continually bringing into disrepute the work that we're doing, that we're constitutionally allowed to do. There must be some responsibility.
Yes.
Again, we need to have that jurisprudential conversation. It's not enough, to my mind, and I say this respectfully, to just come out, to just say, no, you can't do that. There's a jurisprudential conversation. Now, the jurisprudential conversation bears out of the fact that there's also not a single constitutional provision that says that the Senate cannot suspend its members. If in fact, the constitutional provision, section 60 of the Constitution, says you can regulate your conduct. It's now a question of,
for lack of time, I need to come in here because, you know, some people are looking at the entire dynamic. I know you've limited it to the Electoral Act Amendment issue and the response to that, but the larger issue of even the groups that are being formed within the Senate. You have the Parliamentary Support Group with senators like Andrew Uchendu, Abdullahi Adamu, and of course the suspended senator. And then you have the Like Minds Group, which brought Senate President Saraki to power. Only one was disbanded. Is there more levels to the injustice in your view?
Of course. There is equal protection under the law. That's another fundamental. You cannot treat equals unequally or treat unequals equally in a democracy. That's what we call equal protection under the law. That is, again, why everything must be controlled by law. My learned friend is talking about the issue of freedom of expression. Yes, the limits of the freedom of expression is what the law provides.
So wondering now, how do you see this matter being resolved? Do you think it should be resolved by a court of law?
I think the Senate should respect the rule of law. There's a Court of Appeal decision on this issue, and the position of the Court of Appeal is that you cannot suspend a member because the effect of that is to remove the representation of the people, or the representative, or even the people from the National Assembly.
What about you, quickly?
I think that the National Assembly is treating equals equally. There's precedents that it is following.
So you don't think it needs any resolution then?
I think, well, to my mind, we need to get a case that goes all the way to the Supreme Court so that we know definitively, once and for all, whether the Senate has the ability to conduct itself in this manner. But this is the Senate.
We're totally out of time. I'm sorry,
equally.
Mr. Ono-Agege. We're totally out of time. But we have to thank you most kindly for coming on Sunrise Early. Ilemona Ono-Agege is a legal practitioner, and Mr. Tunji Abayomi is also a legal practitioner and the Pro-Chancellor of the Adekunle Ajasin University in Ondo State. Thank you for coming on the program. Well, that's the program this morning from us here as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.
I'm Ajuri Ngelale.
I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I'm Neota Igbe.
Goodbye.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this program are those of the maker and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, and endorsement of Channels Television.